All right, we're going to start. So welcome to this webinar on renewable energy security, the next risk frontier. Today, we will have the pleasure to have three great speakers talking about that topic. And we will discuss how cyber, physical, and geopolitical threats are currently reshaping the risk assessment, bankability, and the opportunities within the renewable energy sector. So on the agenda, I will introduce the three speakers that we have a bit further, but we will have three presentations and we will end up with a Q&A. On my side, I'm Marjorie. I'm even team lead at Solarplaza. And for those who are not familiar, I'm going to quickly share a few words about Solarplaza. Solarplaza is a Dutch company based in Rotterdam, established in 2004. We've been running more than 250 events in 50 countries, and we have a very large network of PV and BESS professionals, more than 60,000 people. And you can find everything that we do, including our events, on our website, www.solarplaza.com, including all the resources like webinars and the white paper that we've been publishing. So in order to share a few practical notes and for you to contribute to that conversation, at the end, we will have a Q&A, as I was mentioning. So along the webinar, you are welcome to use the question box that you can find on your top right of the screen, and you can drop questions that you might have for our experts. As well as if you face any technical issue, don't hesitate to use as well the same question box. My colleague managing everything technically will help you and try to solve that. In the meantime, you might be wondering, are you going to get slides and be able to rewatch that webinar? Yes, this will be made available on our website, but you will also receive an email with instruction in the next 48 hours. So now I would like to invite our three panelists to turn on their cameras, and I'm going to share a few words about each of them for you to get to know them better. So welcome, Gerard, Andreas, and Peter. Very glad to have you three. I will start with our first presenter. It will be Gerard Reid. He is the co-founder and partner of Alexa Capital. Alexa Capital is a boutique investment bank and also an advisory firm. And he has more than 20 years of experience in equity research and fund management focused on the net zero transition. He is also a leading expert and advisor to global decision makers, such as the World Economic Forum, Global Future Councils. And he's also one of the top industry voice. Maybe you know already the famous podcast Redefining Energy, where he's one of the co-hosts. Then we will also have Andreas Ditlev Duckert. He is a solar investor, previously working for the IPP Upton, and he is now managing his own solar assets. He has over 15 years of experience, and he has been doing more than 4 billion transaction deals with around 70 deals. He is also expert at taking energy platform from early stage growth to large scale project finance, M&A, and refinancing. And he manages as well the entire investment life cycle from initial origination and acquisition to operational optimization. Welcome as well. And last but not least, we also have Peter Baard, is strategic advisor, critical infrastructure resilience at Liander, the Dutch grid operator. He has more than 20 years of experience on the security of decentralized energy systems. He chairs as well at the Energy ISAC, driving like shared threat intelligence and cyber readiness across European energy infrastructures. And also is an active leader in the ethical hacking community, the IVD, bridging the gap between technical security and sector-wide policies. So thank you, and very happy to have you all for that webinar on this emerging, I would say, but very important topic lately. So we will start with Gerard. Gerard, we will give you access for you to share your slides.
So look, what I'm talking about today is the race for energy security, and I'll talk in three areas about that. I'll just talk a little bit about what's going on, the big picture in energy, and I'll talk about like what I would call the exponential era, um, which is really all about exponential technologies, and I'll talk a little bit about how they are changing the energy landscape. And then the question is, well, what should we do? What does it all mean for us? So let me just start by saying, look, I think we all agree that what you've got is first huge big driver change and big picture is the whole area of geopolitics. And I think we'd all agree that we're stuck in the middle. In the past, we'd outsourced our energy policy, I would say, to Russia. You could say our industrial policy was outsourced to China, and our tech policy and defense was outsourced to the US. And now we're in a difficult situation. So that's the first big thing that's going on in our world. The second thing really is that, it's the change in American foreign policy, which is America first. And of course, this is already having a huge impact on Europe. Obviously, just the example of Greenland and what's going to happen there is one example, but just it's calling up the whole relationship between North America and Europe over the last, I'd say over my lifetime anyway, that this has been a critical part of everything that we've stood for in Europe. The third thing is, I would say that Europe energy is being geopoliticized. And obviously this started with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, the blowing up of Nord Stream, but you can see it right now when you look at the Strait of Hormuz, you look at what's going on with the attacks in Iran. The reality is suddenly fossil fuels are being used as a bargaining chip, right? The fourth thing that I would say is that you're seeing in the system is the power system risks are increasing. So obviously we had the power blackout in Spain last year, but you also had a recent attack on the Berlin system, which really meant that you had 45,000 homes in the Berlin region, longest blackout since the Second World War. Why I say this is the message is society cannot survive without electricity. Okay, I can survive without coal, I can survive without oil. You take a big city, and if it has no electricity for 3 days, that city collapses. Okay, that's really the reality of it, right? I think the interesting thing, though, and really is a message for everybody here. This is the Berlin grid. I put it down just to give you an idea of how the Berlin grid is constructed. And if you see this, what you see is there's lots of circles and there's lots of spokes coming in and out. And this is a little bit from the history of the city. Don't forget, it was West Berlin. And West Berlin was an island within East Germany. And they basically had their own grid system, and it had to be incredibly stable in case there was some incident with East Germany. And if you went back 35 years ago, just to give you an idea, the West Berlin grid had batteries in it. Now, what's really interesting about this is this grid is all available in the internet. I went and had a look at this yourself, and you can see where this took place was in this Heizkraftwerk Lichterfelde. Now I go across to the right there, you can see the little X point is where actually that system was taken out. And what it was taken out by, basically the cable was set on fire. And then you suddenly had that whole region in between those cables there out. Now, what was really interesting about this, remember this is in West Berlin. If we went back to West Berlin times, this wouldn't have happened because they didn't just have a circular system in that area there. They also had spokes and they had batteries in there. In other words, they had resilience. And I'm only using that as an example, just to give you an idea that in some ways, when it comes to resilience, even in the southernmost city that, built probably the most resilient power system out there, it's not as robust as we think it is, right? The final point I would say in this, though, is for me is it's the start of a revolution. And I will come into this in a second. And I want to make about what is a revolution? A revolution really is an industrial revolution is when when you need to have an industry, an industrial technology, and you need to have a new source of energy or an energy source. So obviously, look, at the beginning of the 20th century, automobile, internal combustion engine, airplanes, etc., it all lived on oil and gas, right? I'm now sort of making a point is we're in the fifth industrial revolution, and that is electricity, and it's AI. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what this is in a second, right? And what this means. So the first thing is I want to make a point, and I think if you look around, you'll understand what I mean. Technologies are exponential. Humans think linearly, okay? And this makes it really difficult to keep up with the speed of change. And the first technology I want to talk about is solar. Solar, we've never seen a technology come to market as fast as solar in energy. And just to give you an idea, last 12 months, enough solar installed globally to power Japan. Now, to put that into perspective, the Japanese power system took 30 years to build, right? And we're able to do that in 1 year. And none of the people who are projecting installations in solar get it right, because again, the human is thinking linearly, and the exponential technology is thinking differently. I do want to make a point as well, is that we're not finished with solar. You've got performance increases going forward. In other words, the panels are getting more and more efficient. And the second thing is happening is costs are going down. And the third thing is installation costs. This is balcony solar. Balcony solar requires no electrical experience whatsoever. And basically, I don't need to put it on my balcony. I can put it in my garden, plug it in, and I am generating electricity way below the wholesale power price, way below the retail power price. And by the way, your grid operator doesn't even know you're doing it. Okay, add in a battery in that, and I can save a huge amount of money. Okay, and again, technology goes across the world. The second thing is batteries. Nothing happened in batteries until the 2000s. And then really what happens was lithium ion has enabled the digital world we're in. All the digital devices that we use lithium ion batteries, but they're getting better and better every year, and they're getting cheaper and cheaper. And the result of this, though, is just explosive demand, fourfold increase in demand in the last 4 years. Now, I'm not talking 25% growth a year. Remember that. That's like 75% annualized growth a year. The stationary storage market, 90% growth, right? And then for me, the most interesting thing about it is it's solar and storage, which is unstoppable. And this is just an Australian example, and I won't get lost in it, but just if you look to the right-hand side, you can basically go off grid using batteries and solar, overbuilding batteries for 15, 17 cents. If you include an EV in there, in other words, you use that large battery then in the EV for, for optimization purposes, you're at 13, 14 cents. The Australians pay 28 cents, okay? And again, just to give you a view of what happens going forward as these technologies get cheaper and perform better. The third technology is what I call sensors and IoT. Semiconductors, that's the brains of everything. Sensor, it's about measuring things. It can be measuring pressure, measuring heat, measuring movement, all that type of stuff. And IoT is basically, you have to transfer that information somewhere, right? The communication technology. To give you an idea of what's going on, this is just the Blackwell chips. The Blackwell chips are, in terms of, these are what's used in the NVIDIA's new chips. 2 Blackwell chips are equivalent to the Tainan supercomputer from 2015. Now, to put that into perspective, these chips are, 2 of these chips are the size of your mobile phone. So that is more powerful than the Tainan supercomputer. The Tainan supercomputer cost €1 million. Okay, just to put it into perspective. And again, the other thing about these is, again, you see this on the right-hand side. 1 Blackwell chip uses a village phone of iPhones in terms of power consumption. So they do massive amounts of computing power, but the other thing that they require is massive amounts of energy, right? Related to this is semiconductors, and semiconductors are all about moving power around, converting AC to DC, DC to DC, all that type of stuff. If you look in the new BMW iX3, just to give you an idea, 50% increase in range. This is largely caused by a mixture of better batteries and better power electronics, all right? And software related to that. They put heat pumps in it, all this type of stuff, right? Again, to give you an idea, these things are getting lower cost, better performance. The fourth technology is AI, and I just put it, I know we have an idea what AI is, just to give you an idea. Traditional software, if X happens, do Y. So it's all conditional, right? AI software, completely different. It figures out what to do when X happens. Okay, completely different approach and a completely way of rethinking the way software works, right? And the result of this, of course, is that, if you look at, say, something like ChatGPT, we have never seen a technology come to market as quickly as it, right? It took 5 days to actually hit 1 million. In fact, there was a recent AI program that came out that took 12 hours to get to 1 million. So just to give you an idea, right? The point I'm making is that this is, we've never seen anything in terms of the speed that this technology has come to market. And again, back to the speed of it, AI has gone from outperforming, failing science tests to outperforming PhD students in the last 2 years, right? That's what we're seeing going on. And the other thing that happens, of course, is AI is driving massive amounts of computing power and electricity. The left, I just want to give you an idea of the left there. The left is very important because this is tokens. A token, by the way, is like a small word like the, THE, right? And if you look in Google, you went back in May 2024, it was doing 9.7 trillion tokens a month. It's now 1,300. Just to give you an idea, the amount of data processing that Google doing is off the chart. The result of it is that you have, OpenAI on the right-hand side saying, hey, if we're gonna continue in this AI race, we need 250 gigawatts of electricity capacity by 2033. Okay, that's probably half of Europe's power needs. Okay. So the question then is, that's for me is the revolution. The question is, what do we do? So one, we need to wake up and see the challenges. And I start with Europe. And I'm not going to get lost in the politics of it, but we do live in a world which is fraught with danger and radically different than anything in our lives. So we have to see these challenges and deal with them. The second thing is we need to electrify everything. Transport, industry, heat and cooling as quickly as possible, right? Third thing is we need to reimagine the future power system. The past power system was built on a historic grid, which is large power generation outside cities, big wires to bring them in, and you move them around the cities. We then moved to a world in that middle there, where we have, some of us have electric cars, some of us have solar on the roofs. It's a bit more distributed, but it's not all connected together, and it's not resilient at all. Okay, now resilience for me is what happens if something attacks the system. Well, if you attack the whole system, it goes down. But so well, why can we not build a system that doesn't all go down? And that's why I say we need to reimagine it. And reimagine it also means reimagining how you regulate the system, reimagining the incentive structures in that, and also how it's managed as well. Okay. This point about resilience, and again, I'm not going to get lost in all the detail I put down here, but for me, resilience, it comes from diversification. You need to have lots of different types of assets spread across the country. You need to have flexibility, right? In other words, guess what? You need to have that electric car battery in case there's a power failure. And you need to really look about risks in the system, right? And again, I've put down a whole pile of stuff in here, which we'll go into later on, but there is a completely different approach needed in the system than we have up today if we're going to make sure that we have 24/7 power going forward. Right? I say that very clearly. That's what we have to do. The fifth thing I'd say is follow the money. The money is not going to fossil fuels. The money is going into producing more and more electrons, right? And you can just see that the numbers there to give you an idea. Anything to do with electricity, what you're seeing, and you've seen this in the last 5 years, is capital is going in there. Capital is not going into fossil fuels. And in particular, capital is going into renewables, actually. And if you see this here, this is just, again, the IEA numbers gives you an idea. The majority of the money goes into renewables, solar, wind, hydro, biomass. The sixth point I would say is get rid of bureaucracy. The US, I would say, is speed. Oligarchical approach is all about how can we make money. It's all about power. China is all about long term, what's good for our country. We think, what's the system going to look like in 10 years' time? And my criticism of Europe is we just have paperwork, right? Masses and masses of paperwork. And by the way, I'm not just saying the EU, it's at the government level, it's at the company level, and we're just too slow, okay? The seventh message I would say to you is just follow Chinese lead and electrify. 60% of all cars in the last quarter in China are electric. They're not doing it because of pubsies. They're doing it because they're cheap to buy, cheap to run, right? And they are doing everything in their powers to do everything in electrical, right? But I will say that the key thing is that make sure electricity is cheaper than fossil fuels, right? So industry, it's cheaper to use electricity than natural gas. It's cheaper to actually fuel your car and buy a car, an electric car, than an internal combustion engine car, right? Meanwhile, I would say back in Europe, we do the opposite. Electricity is way, way too expensive across most countries, Ireland, UK, Germany. You're paying 30 euro cents per kilowatt hour for electricity, right? Industry, too expensive, et cetera, et cetera. So we really need to think about, yes, electricity is more efficient, but if it's more efficient, Why is it all more expensive? And we really need to focus on what we can do to bring down the cost of electricity. And I would say to all of us, really, as a last thing here, is that it's very important for all of us to have this growth mindset at home and within our organizations, right? Because the speed of change is so quick. What I think is right today could be wrong in a week's time. That's the speed of change that's going on and around us. And for me, then I make this point about AI is you can block it, you can run away from it. But I would just say to you, AI won't take your job, but the human with AI will. So your challenge for all of us is to make we stay on top of this. And you have to view AI as an assistant for you. It helps you do a better job, a better version of who you are. And I make this point about, again, growth. That's what's needed when we look at AI. And the final slide for you is, I just want to make a point, is the opportunity in front of us is massive. That's what we have to focus on. Don't focus on what could go wrong, but focus on, what the opportunity is going forward. Thank you very much. And listen, I'm sorry, I think I probably went a little bit over time there. Apologies.
Thank you very much, Gerard. So you will stay with us for the Q&A at the end of this webinar. And just a reminder to all of the attendees that if you have any questions for Gerard or the other presenters, don't hesitate to drop that in the question box on top of your screen right side. We will address them at the end. And now I'm gonna invite Andreas to join, and yes, we will give you also access. You're perfect. And Andreas is going to share with you the asset owner perspective on cybersecurity and security and resilience. So I'll let it to you, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you for a very exciting speech, Gerard. We didn't coordinate, but it seems we have the same topic in mind. I come from a slightly different perspective as the asset owner / investor perspective, not an expert in cybersecurity, not an expert in policy, but investing my own capital across Europe and operate them. So today I'll share an investor's perspective of energy security and why I believe it matters more than most of us think. So going into numbers, I'm a numbers guy. What we're seeing in Europe is that we're sending more than 400 billion euros out every year importing fossil fuels. That's 58% of the energy we consume, and it still comes from outside our borders, despite the 30 years where we're trying to electrify the grids. We talk a lot about energy as a cost issue. We talk about it as a climate issue. But after Ukraine, hummus, everything we have seen, energy is a security issue. And to me, a country that imports energy imports its vulnerability. And that changes how we should think about what we build and how we own it. So solar has gone through 3 different eras. I joined the market in 2009, and there the solar system was powered by governments guaranteeing returns. So if you produce power, you'll be paid. Then, as Gerard was also pointing out in his presentation, solar is now the cheapest form of energy, and that makes the market become self-sufficient. But it actually, in the grand scheme of the geopolitical theme, this changes. This means now the era is sovereignty and security. So solar, once built, is input independent. It requires no fuel, no imports, and no dependency on foreign supply chains for its daily operation. And in our current dangerous world, that matters. So summing up, with solar, there are no fuel to embargo, no pipeline to cut, no tanker room to defend. So solar is no longer just cheap energy, it's energy that nobody can embargo. So that takes a strategic role from being green to being security. So coming back, we spent billions of euros taking money outside our continent to import oil. Whereas if we were just to build up renewable assets, it's a one-time investment. It sits in your own land and you have sovereign control. So as you all know, solar is not perfect yet. The systems are not built for solar and wind energy. It's built for coal and oil. That means that when the sun shines, the electricity grid have a tendency to break down. But breaking down, it's not a big issue. It's a marginal thing. So if you were to invest between 50 and 200 billion euros, you would actually, by using heat pumps, EV charging, other flexible demand cooling structures, be able to fix that flexibility gap. And that would be almost a tenth of what we spend on importing fuels, and it would be up to around 10% of the defense spending. So from my perspective, sitting on the solar side and investor side, I think the best policy for defense wouldn't be to buy more rockets. It would be to stop paying the guys that are shooting rockets at us. So let's see here. Change slide. Oops, slides are jumping here. I don't have control here. So coming into the industry, I was managing other people's money for the first 15 years of my career. And that's definitely a very good way to get your experience. So when we look at solar parks, and I've looked at quite a few of them, you see the same field, you see the same modules, same inverters, same cabling, yet performance are very different. So when you manage other people's money, risk is governance, it's committees, it's reports, it's processes. When you manage your money, risk is consequence, and consequences quickly simplify decisions. Boom. So what we've seen, when you build and buy solar parks, as I do, you look at spreadsheets and forecasting models. So we're trying to predict what will happen. But in this world, many things happen. And the challenge in asset management is not so much managing a system that's operating with budget or where a plug goes out, but it's when strange things happen. We had a severe hailstorm in Italy where 14,000 modules were destroyed. We lost 6 weeks of production, and it wasn't in the model. We were also revamping some of our solar sites, and then COVID hit, so we were waiting 6 months for an understructure, and that was not in the model either. But the funny thing was that our monitoring dashboard at the day of the hailstorm that physically destroyed the park said everything was fine, but the field disagreed. So what we see is we invest heavily in sophistication, AI, analytics, real-time monitoring, and compliance frameworks. But who do you call Saturday morning, 6 a.m. on a day that's supposed to be sunny when the storm hits? You have to call somebody. You don't need a report, but you need things to be fixed. And that's where ownership changes the game. So when you buy a solar park, these things are financed over 20, sometimes 30 years. And investors care about one thing. Will it still produce if things go wrong? The question is not, does it pass a compliance checklist? The question is, would I trust this power critical infrastructure for 20 years? And if renewables are to replace imported energy, and I believe they must, then we must treat them as what they are, not energy assets, but defense infrastructure. Technology produces electricity, resilience produces security. So let me jump forward. So in conclusion, the cheapest kilowatt hour is powerful, but the secure kilowatt hour is geopolitical. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andreas. Thank you for sharing your perspective on this. And to continue this webinar, I will invite Peter to join us and share the grid operator perspective now. Yes, good to have you. You're muted at the moment, Peter. And we
Yes,
will.
now I'm not. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Perfect. Yeah. Great. Okay, so I'll let you take over, and you have access to your slides that you can move slowly because it's a little bit lagging. So always wait, and it's gonna move. Yes.
I don't see it moving. Wait 1 second. No. The arrow pins don't work.
We will give you again access.
Okay. Let's see.
And it's arrow on the right side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now it's moving, so it's gonna come. Yes. Perfect. Thank you.
I will see if I can save some time for Q&A.
Yes.
My main focus is from grid perspective and especially from the digital resilience side. Already mentioned before, we are, because of the energy transition, we moving towards a decentralized system where two-way electricity flows are the new standard. And in order to handle all these complexities, we have way more digital data exchanges between a lot of new market players within the system. Oh yeah, there's a lag. Yeah. With complexity comes incidents, as already shown in the report mentioning 2024, we see an increase in the number of events that we need to take care of. It's foreseen that in 2025 it will be further increase. So I think this is something to focus on. Also, if you look at the NERC report, they also mentioned from the last years that, and that's already, I think, almost 10 years, but that 15 gigawatts of unexpected generation of power reduction was caused by inverter-based systems. So that's something, especially if you look at Gerard's perspectives of really extreme growth in solar, this is something to keep into perspective for resilience purposes. If you look at distributed energy resources, it's important to understand who controls these resources. On the left side, you see multiple roles there. I think the biggest ones are the manufacturers themselves. It's not a market role, but they have the keys to the kingdom. They have root level access to all equipment installed of their products. And in most cases, I will come back to later, that involves gigawatts. On the right-hand side, you see some components mentioned. I think it's really important to understand that all these things like cloud, app, gateway, they are internet-facing components, meaning that we have a major attack surface. So the usage part is nice, but with these large-scale attack surfaces, we need to focus on also securing this sufficiently. If you look at the network code on cybersecurity, we see here on the right side some thresholds on a country level. On the critical impact, you see the major threshold of 3 gigawatt. And already in 2023, we had, with cloud scale aggregation of their assets, we way surpassed these critical thresholds, meaning that manufacturers or other solution providers that control these assets can really cause major disruptions in the energy grid. So for me, and that's the focus on my presentation, it's the centralized control via the cloud. That's a major risk factor, and that's also something that creates a systemic risk to grid stability. And sometimes we think really sophisticated that attacks are quite complex, but most attacks still so far also include low tech and also low complexity. So we can disrupt even with easy methods used. Something that really we should take notice on is the attack factor of permanently bricking devices. Because if you can do that from the cloud on a massive scale, be aware we have to visit every location in order to recover from these attacks. So especially that one is from recovery perspective, a really scary one. This is I think a nice area. I wouldn't call it nice, but an example for food for thought. This was a test situation with a 100 megawatt battery, where there was one configuration setting wasn't in order. That caused oscillations, and these oscillations caused both the S-Link 1 and 2 interconnectors to go down, and with that 1 gigawatt of capacity. So one configuration parameter can cause a 1 gigawatt capacity going down. I also asked them, are they remotely accessible? Yes. And in most cases, most solutions are not sold once, but multiple times. So the question is, how many storage systems do we have in the system with the same configuration parameters, with perhaps have a central location from where these parameters can be set? With that, I would like to ask also for strategic focus, not just on the use cases of all these means, but especially also on the abuse potential of these solutions. Then we had last year, we had the Poland attack on about 30 plus wind and solar farms. Was also, I think, a heat factory also involved. What you see here is, if you read the report from the Poland CERT, is that most basic security hygiene was insufficient. Usage of default credentials, and you can read the list. And this is not the exception. You see it a lot, and especially with me also having my connections in the ethical hacker community. It's really scary to see how much organizations don't have their technical security in order. And I think it's not a technical challenge for the techies. It should be a strategic board level topic. And once I also made the joke that we need an annual hacker and ethical hacker and nerd appreciation day, because in most cases you don't see those people, but that are the people that can also protect large-scale organization and solution from being hacked and being out of control. And I think a big challenge is with all the new security and resilience related legislation, it's so much that most organizations focus on the compliance itself, and they don't focus based on the spirit of this legislation, on the security and resilience, and as a result of that, being compliant. So I hope there will be more focus on the security and the resilience itself, and not just to think from compliance perspective. Also involved in DRHD in the Netherlands, they also disclose a lot of vulnerabilities in the energy domain. Here are some examples. We also mentioned low tech. The Solomon case is with one security engineer. He's really good in searching and found the global admin password of Solomon twice. If he would abuse it, he would be able to steer gigawatts of power on a global scale. So it's really nice that we have these ethical hackers spending their own time and researchers to make the internet a little bit more safe. But this is not a model that can really exist with all the major risk factors for our grid. And imagine the same handling of the same vulnerabilities by threat actors like criminal organizations or assistant of APTs, advanced persistent threats like governments. For now, it looks like the premise was still so far, we need big tech clouds, scale. But the question is the scale perhaps becoming too large? Last year, we had major outages on the web. And actually, the web is designed to be decentralized. And if something happens, that other traffic can continue. But with the big dominant big tech cloud providers, we see that if a major dominant service is down, that a large percentage of the internet is going down. If you look at the definition of cloud, or be aware what is the cloud service, because actually it is quite scary. There's a service provided through an external party where we have absolutely no clue about the supply chain of digital components behind the service itself. Which countries involved, who can access the data, who can manipulate the data, we have no clue. We only interface with the cloud service itself. From a supply chain perspective, that's quite scary. That I will show also at the end of my presentation. And it's also good, perhaps, nowadays with the new geopolitical situations in the world. What's the impact of unavailability of these of internet access or cloud platforms for energy management systems or flex services being provided? Here I have an example of the top 7, and again these numbers are arranged from 2023, so the numbers should be way higher by now. But at that time already 7 manufacturers had the ability to remotely manipulate more than 10 gigawatts of generation capacity. As shown before, that's, I would call that blackout power, blackout potential. A lot of legislation is focusing on the security side. So, but even if these parties are the best in class on security level, it's the business model itself and the scale. That's the scary part, because even if they are the best in class, they still, from their cloud platforms, are able to remotely manipulate these amounts of generation capacity. Another thing, example of the hidden supply chain behind services. I mentioned Solarman platform at DFD, where they found the password. Bitdefender in the US found enough vulnerabilities that they could take over the platform if they were evil party. Thank God they were not. But what they showed, and that you can see on the right-hand side, all the other companies that use the same platform. If I take one, for example, Canadian Solar, if they provide services, you don't directly have a clue that they use a Chinese solar platform to manage these assets. Then another one aspect is the Undersea internet backbone. We speak a lot about the cloud with the nice sky perspective. I think seawater would have been better. 99% of all international data traffic flows through the seas, where most of the sea cables are owned by the US, and 50% of the global undersea capacity is owned by the top four big tech giants like Amazon, Microsoft, Google. This is a geopolitical domain. It's also a quality domain. As you can see on the right-hand side, is we can have bad anchors going on, under the sea, hurting these cables. But China even invited a deep sea cutter. And the fact that they can really go low in the sea is a risk factor, because that is the part where the sea cables are less protected. And the question also arises, why also, for example, for the Netherlands, why should we have traffic related to the Netherlands going all across the world? And why not leave the data where it is, if possible, especially for critical infrastructure? We see more strategic focus on sovereignty and resilience. I have some questions to think about your own services. But having a framework is one, being able to really mitigate these risks and taking back control, I think that's a bigger challenge. And to conclude, and you can make your own judgment yourself based on the comparison of, if you look at the different topics on how a nuclear power plant, or perhaps also a normal power plant, is being handled from security resilience perspective versus the cloud control energy resources, it's a major difference, and this mismatch is, I think, is the core structural risk for the grids and in order to safeguard the energy supply. So I think this is not a model that can exist with all the risk factors that we have. So we need better resilience concepts and solutions. And with that, I would like to conclude, and hopefully we can work together on a more resilient energy supply.
Thank you very much, Peter, for sharing all of that. I will invite Andreas and Gerard as well to join that Q&A session. Thank you to you three. I will also remind everyone that you can drop as well your question there, and I will kickstart that Q&A session based on everything you've been sharing. Already, like to bounce back on what Peter, you were sharing as you finished this presentation, can you tell us how a DSO like Liander at the moment is adapting to the increased digitalization of the grid and the associated risk at the moment?
Of course, we build, increase the amount of copper in the ground. But the topics I mentioned before are behind the connection we have with the participants. So actually, we have indirect influence. We can warn, we can assist. We also with the legislators, but there's not under our control. And that's also the scary part, because the number of risk factors that is growing with potential impact on the grid is growing every year with all the developments that also Gerard and Andreas were mentioning.
Okay, so then potentially it's more on the asset owner perspective. I mean, like Andreas, as an asset owner, based on all of the risk mentioned by Peter, like, is there something that asset owners in general in Europe at the moment are doing to try to prevent this massive risk?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're becoming more and more aware of is historically it was great to build those mega sites. They're cheaper to run, cheaper to build, and cheaper to everything. However, they also have a lot of sensitivity on sites. So we see more a future of decentralized power. So a solar site can function on its own. So I think we see a future where you have it sort of decentralized power stations that could run more or less full scale with itself. We're not there yet, but hope to do that, maybe combining that with EV charging or other things, so you have less reliance on the grids. And that's also where we sort of see the solar opportunity in the world of, let's say, terror attacks of any sort. If you take out a solar park, it's relatively cheap to rebuild. So if you have more smaller sites, it's a lot more difficult to break down the physical side of solar.
Right, thank you. And Gerard, on the investment side, is this risk a factor that is this factored, sorry, in the investment made, and on how costly this can become in the future? If
no, it's not. In a nutshell, it's not. And I give a very practical example of this. About 5 years ago, I was in the US Senate, and I gave a presentation on how I'd bring down the US grid. And I'm not technical like Peter, but I was able, and you can see Peter was sort of showing you how it can be done. But one of the things I did was I showed them how and I won't even use the word break-in, how I'd get into a solar system in Europe. I won't say which country it was in. And the reason I was able to get into it was because they had standardized passwords, which they had not changed, which are available in the internet. And I went and checked this recently. So this is 5 years later, and they still haven't changed the password. And this particular power plant is institutional owned. So I see Peter's nodding in agreement with me. I think we've got a very big issue here, and this area needs to be taken seriously. And I do know, and listen, Andreas can talk more about this, I know the whole area of passwords is a complete and utter nightmare for anybody who's managing solar parks or solar systems, because, you know, let's imagine I have some of my clients that are, one of my clients is managing 30,000 rooftop solar systems, right? That's 30,000 passwords, right? So that whole area of passwords it's a bit of a nightmare, to be honest, you know. But it is definitely a threat. If somebody wants to take a system down, then, you know, you're going at these inverters, you're going at these energy management systems, stuff like that. That's what you're doing.
All right. And
can I elaborate
yeah, of course,
please,
go ahead.
Peter, please.
If from the decentral side, you have all these passwords, but that's why I focus with my presentation on the cloud side. For example, with the Solomon platform, you need one password.
Yeah.
It didn't even have multi-factor authentication. It was the global password. If you see the amount of pressure we used by using the embassy, the National Cybersecurity Center, etc., to ensure that they would change the password. And the researcher, he was cleaning his desk, even I think also a year later or something. It's a little bit similar like Gerard was mentioning. I said, what heck, let's try the old password again. And it was restored again. And that's the global, and that's also that was the one with all the other all the other organizations using the same platform. That's the global one where the gigawatts were all the way, where you could control and dispatch firmware everywhere. So legislation is nice, compliance is nice, but if it's not implemented in the practice, we have severe risks.
All right. Yeah, so then I was wondering as well, like the risk at the moment, now we've been focusing then more on Europe. Looking at what you presented, Peter, I assume the risk at the moment is more on this continent and a bit less on America or Asia, looking at supply on one side and sea cable on the other side. So is there something being done at the European level to try to push all of the stakeholders in Europe to protect better? I mean, of course, based on what we can do, because that's a bit difficult to go without manufacturers and also without the cloud, I guess. So this is being discussed.
Actually, I don't know the differences between Asia and the US. I think Gerard knows more in that space. What I mentioned with the sea cables is, and that's also, if I take the Netherlands as an example, we exchange a lot of data to have the energy system working. But if everyone is using these global cloud services, the real traffic goes all around the world. And if you look at the cloud service itself, there are a lot of components used that also involve other countries. And sometimes we learn also on the global level that there's some dependency somewhere in the country, somewhere at the other side of the ocean, that's having a dependency on the things that work here. And that's what I mentioned. So I only focused on the Netherlands part, and there I would say, and that's a little bit what Andreas on the fiscal side was also saying, perhaps we need more decentralized approach using global standards. That's really good, but also have local implementation that if the grid goes down of other things, that you can handle these complexities, especially if you have can cause major societal impact. And also for the large organizations, I'm curious from shareholder perspective or responsibility or reputation. Suppose you are the #1 cause of causing a major blackout with even casualties, and not just the economical side. In most cases, with a major blackout, we also see fatal casualties. No organization, commercial organization, should have that responsibility, in my perspective.
All right. Andreas and Gerard, any best practice or advice to the room based on your different perspective, obviously?
Well, I go back to, I like the way Peter has framed this. I think we need to think about this in a completely different way, which we need to look at the risks in and around the power system. The old world of N-1, if the cable, if I can't use that cable, I can go this way. That's the old world. The world is, what are the most important risks to the system, and let's focus on dealing with them. I think that's the big step that I would like to see going forward. And there's a lot more beyond that besides this, because I could also talk about transformers, right? And there's a whole pile of things where you look and you say, well, if I really want to do something nasty, I can do it. And we need to, you know, as I said, take a risk-based approach, in my opinion, in terms of how we build resilience in the system.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point there. And I think actually also the transition I was going a little bit into is that we were just producing energy as cheap as possible, but we're sort of forgetting the security angle. So it should sort of be priced in. How can we make sure that people are compensated to secure the system? Because as long as we as investors are paid for kilowatt hours, that's what we're going to do. We're simple people. But I think if you say now we have the best technology, as you also mentioned, Gerard, coming into a whole new perspective, then you can actually islandize the solar park, and it becomes an independent unit. So then if you go on a, let's say, market economic side, then you have many guys in the system. You can take out Andreas, you can take out some of Peter plants, you can take some of Gerard plants, but if they are small enough, you wouldn't destabilize the system. And that would be a great political way to take it and tackle it. I'm not sure it happens, but that would be my view on it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you to the three of you. We're going to be almost at 3 o'clock now. At the Dutch time, of course, not sure where everyone is joining from. So for Gerard, it's a bit earlier, but for the rest of us, I think it was on that time. So thank you very much to you three for sharing everything you know on that topic and giving your insights and best practices and highlighting the risk at the moment that we are facing. So once again, thank you, and I wish you a pleasant day, and thank you for everyone who's been joining.